This is Just Right. Sweet Haven Farm Sweet Small Town Romance, Book 3. Written by Jessie Gussman. Performed by J. Dice. Episode 3. Chapter 4. The dog hater was standing with his mother. Gator ground his teeth together. Just because she didn't like Gladys and Finch didn't mean that she wasn't good with anyone. Still, it annoyed him that she was here with his mom. Or maybe he was angry at himself because the sight of her had made his heart skip and the dark cloud that seemed to be following him lift.
"Hi, Gator. I wasn't expecting you so early."
His mother sounded weak and tired. Fear caused his irritation to hitch up another notch. His eyes snapped to the little blonde. "You should know better than to have her outside working in her condition. She's exhausted. You need to know when to quit." It was an unfair attack. Guilt choked Gator's throat. Avery's eyes opened wide as she eased his mother down on the couch. He hadn't considered decorating the house or yard for Christmas, but when he saw it, he knew someone had made the effort just to make his mother smile. It should have been him. He should have thought of it. He should have been here helping her all fall. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm sorry. I'm more angry at myself. But she is tired." There. He'd seemed to get really good at apologizing for stuff he couldn't even say he'd done, and it still hadn't kept his ex happy. He had vowed to never apologize to a woman again. Still, it didn't take a brain surgeon to see that in this case, he needed to. Avery squatted down at the foot of the couch and gently slipped off his mother's shoes.
"It's okay. You're right. We were talking and I got excited about something and we should have stopped a long time ago."
His mom waved a hand.
"Stop it, Gator. I like the company."
"You've tired yourself out." He grabbed the folded comforter from the back of the couch.
"Just because I have cancer doesn't mean that I'm not an adult that has been making her own decisions since before you were born, and I can continue to do so."
His mother smiled to soften her words.
"I was having fun. I think Avery was too."
Her last statement sounded uncertain, and her eyes cut to Avery, who had set the shoes aside and carefully placed his mother's feet on the couch. Gator's heart ached, and he thought of the ugly snowman in the hall. He opened his mouth to reassure his mother that she was still beautiful on the inside. But Avery was already talking.
"I love looking at the old pictures and dreaming about other places and times. But Gator's right. We should have stopped before you were too tired to stand. You can't fight the cancer if your body is exhausted by doing things, even if they are fun."
As she spoke, she tucked the blanket in around his mom's feet.
"Now, you better not say that I've worn you out too much and you're not hungry, or your scary-looking son might forget about feeding me to his dogs and eat me himself."
Gator pursed his lips to keep from grinning.
"I'll eat,"
his mother said, not bothering to hide her grin.
"That's what I want to hear. I'll go warm up that bowl of chicken rice soup."
Avery walked out, not looking at him. Why would she? He'd basically yelled at her and insulted her, while all the time it was obvious she cared from the careful way she handled his mother and spoke to her. He waited until he heard sounds from the kitchen before he opened his mouth to voice the thought that was uppermost on his mind. Isn't this what home nursing is supposed to do? Feed you, help you up and around? What is she doing here? His mother's eyes stayed shut, but her chest compressed like she was letting out a long sigh.
Home nursing does a great job, and I loved Laura, my nurse this fall. But since she quit, the other nurses, they're very professional, and I'm not complaining, but they don't.
Her mouth trembled. Gator knelt and took her hand.
They don't love me. I'm just a job to them.
And this Avery does? He regretted the question as soon as it left his lips. Never mind. Did you consider that maybe she's expecting you to die and thinks you'll sign the house and ground over to her?
Gator!
Mom, I don't know this person, and you really don't either. People do this kind of thing all the time. They prey on folks that are too old or sick to think straight. He didn't actually believe this of Avery, but once he'd started on the subject, it seemed like a good idea to continue. His mother didn't actually own the house. When his grandfather died, leaving it to her, she had signed it over to him, saying that it was rightfully his, since she wasn't actually a real part of the family. In return, he had said that as long as she was alive, it was her house to live in.
Gator, I raised you better.
His mother still didn't open her eyes or raise her voice, but her words cut him just the same. Because they were true. I'm sorry. He seemed to be unable to open his mouth today without saying something he needed to apologize for. I feel guilty because she's doing the things that I should have thought of doing. His mother draped an arm across her eyes like she had a headache, but her mouth ticked up some.
You're a man. I would be weirded out if you suggested decorating.
Weirded out?
People say that on TV all the time. Why can't I?
Because you're my mom, and my mom doesn't talk like that. And his mom wasn't bald and didn't have cancer, and it always looked young and healthy. He couldn't stand it if her personality changed too. As though she could read his thoughts, she patted his hand.
How was your trip?
It was great. I got the things I needed out of my apartment, and my boss said I could take as much time off as I needed to. He didn't add that he wouldn't be paying any more rent on his apartment, so everything he left was gone for good. And he could take as much time off as he wanted, without pay.
That's wonderful. But really, you don't need to stay here with me. An occasional visit is fine, and if you can't swing that, we can talk on the phone.
Before he could answer, Avery walked in carrying a bowl on a tray.
Here's your soup, Mrs. Franks.
A glass and some pills, along with silverware and a napkin, were arranged beside a vase with one happy yellow rose. Maybe it was just a grocery store flower, but his mother's eye caught on its cheerful color, and it made her smile. Gator stared at the flower. Everything Avery did made him feel inadequate. His mother loved the flower, just as she loved the knickknacks and the yard decorations. Why couldn't he think to do something that would make her smile? Paying the deductibles and copays that lay stacked on her desk an inch thick ought to do it. The sooner he could get that old barn torn down, the sooner he could make his mother smile, ease some of the worry lines from her forehead. Avery set the tray down on the coffee table.
Can we prop some pillows behind you?
Gator stood and took the pillows that Avery held. When she didn't let go, he looked down. Her eyes cracked like flint, and her mouth didn't move when she gritted out,
I'd like to talk to you alone.
His heart beat faster. Drat the stupid thing. Turning back to his mom, he said, This soup's a little hot, and Avery has something in the kitchen she needs me to see. His mother nodded slowly, not opening her eyes.
I've been telling you for days that the light over the stove needs fixed.
Avery needs to show me.
He didn't wait for his mother's answer and stepped away from the couch. He didn't touch Avery as he brushed by her, but for some reason he couldn't explain, he grabbed her hand. He tugged on her hand and she moved to follow him, not speaking, not pulling away either. When they got to the kitchen, he was so focused on how he could unobtrusively keep holding her hand that he had forgotten she was angry. He turned to face her, freezing at the look on her face. If you honestly think that I'm here to take your mother's house or money or anything else that is your mother's, I want to tell you now.
I don't.
A few more words came out of her mouth before his too penetrated. Her mouth stopped, open halfway. Her brows lifted. She took in a deep breath, then exhaled. There was only a short distance between them, a few inches separating their bodies, and the air around them seemed to settle as the charge dissipated. That's not what you said, Avery breathed out, just as quiet, but these words were without heat.
I know. I'm stupid sometimes.
Wrinkles appeared in her forehead and her lips pursed. He took the offensive.
Mom doesn't even own the house. I do.
I don't care.
I know.
So you don't want your mother to like or trust me?
I told you, I'm stupid sometimes. I want to protect her when I'm not around, and it seemed like a good idea, since I was on the subject anyway, that I warn her about strangers taking advantage. I knew as I was saying it that you weren't a threat.
How did you know?
I saw the way you handled her. I saw you waving your overgrown trumpet around. You climb light poles for fun.
I most certainly do not. Her hand twitched in his, and he realized that he hadn't ever let go. He'd be darned if he was going to now. It felt way too good in his. There was no harm in holding someone's hand.
Fink and Ellie wouldn't trust you if you weren't trustworthy. Honestly, I look at everything you've done to make her smile, and I realize that I should be doing those things.
Avery's expression had changed. Her eyes pleaded with him to understand. I really like your mom. She's like the mom I wish I had. Not that my mom wasn't a good mom. She did her best. But Mrs. Franks is so nurturing. I know it's good to help people, and I enjoy doing that for the sake of being a good person, but I'm here with your mom because I truly enjoy her company. Her lips formed an O before she yanked her hand out of his. But maybe you could help her with her soup. I really need to go. And, without waiting for an answer, she turned and was down the hall and through the front door so fast, Gator actually looked behind him to make sure the stove wasn't on fire. He had no idea what caused her to fly away. But his hand felt warm, and it tingled along with his heart as he stood in the kitchen with a bemused smile on his face. Chapter 5. What had she done? Avery blew into her tuba, not even thinking about the music as she hammered out the bass line of the tuba polka. She'd memorized it years ago and didn't have to give the notes a thought. Which was good, because she was so busy castigating herself for holding a married man's hand. She hated cheaters,
Those people who made promises that meant less than broken glass and rotted fish. People like her dad. Someone younger, someone prettier. Someone who didn't have a loud, obnoxious daughter who never stopped talking. Then that loud, obnoxious daughter grows up and manages to find a man exactly like her dad, dates him, and almost marries him. Would have married him if the guy had waited to cheat on her until after the second ring was on her finger. Now she was just like them, those women.
Maybe you're being a little dramatic.
Avery jerked her head up at Jillian's voice. She hadn't even realized that she'd come to the end of the music. She lowered her tuba away from her mouth and looked across the old barn floor as Jillian closed the wooden door behind her.
Dramatic?
Had Jillian found out? How? She hadn't breathed a word. Surely Gator wouldn't have.
You told Ellie that having this Christmas party could save a neighbor's life.
Jillian gracefully jumped up on the knee railing that divided the barn floor in half. Relief made her exhale deeply. So maybe that was a little dramatic.
Research has shown that a positive attitude is invaluable in overcoming a sickness like cancer. You have no idea how much this will cheer her up if we get it right. Dog owners are more likely to survive cancer than cat owners.
Jillian did a perfect back bend on the knee wall.
You made that up.
Avery set her tuba down in its case. She pressed the mouthpiece into its velvet holder.
If anyone ever does a study on it, that's what they'll find.
If anyone did a study on girls whose fathers cheated on their mothers, what would they find? Was she messed up in a conventional way, or was she abnormal all the way around? Because normal women did not go around holding hands with married men, especially married men that they didn't even like. Because she didn't like Gator. Much. Honestly, she might have been a little attracted to him before she found out that he was married, despite the dog issue. But now that she knew, she was not going to give him another thought. She stood up, brushing off her knees, and looked around. Jillian had disappeared, and Avery knew what that meant.
I'm up here. I figured you'd found something to climb.
Miss Prissy Pants padded over from where she had been grooming herself. She rubbed against Avery's leg, then looked up, blinking her green eyes.
Just a minute, miss.
Avery picked up the slightly altered baby carrier and fitted it over her shoulders, clicking the fastenings. Then she swooped down and deposited Miss Prissy Pants in it. She stroked her head and searched the ceiling for Jillian, finally spotting her on the top beam over the large open barn floor.
I can see the big picture up here. The thing needs cleaned first.
Avery gave Miss Prissy Pants one last pat, then pulled her phone from her pocket and pulled up the Notes app. After creating a document, she put a number 1, then typed clean. Something banged against the outside wall.
What was that?
Jillian called. It had sounded like someone hammered against the wall.
I'll check.
A gap from a few missing boards seemed to be close to where the noise came from. Avery walked cautiously along the old floor. Not only were there boards missing from the walls, but the floor, which was covered in places with old hay and straw, had a few holes in it as well. She wasn't going to think about what that said about the safety of her idea of having a party in less than 3 weeks. The floor could be patched. She stuck her head out the hole.
What are you doing?
Gator stood halfway up a ladder perched against the side of the barn. A tool belt hung from his waist. A huff caused Avery to glance to the left and freeze. His ferocious, man-eating canines lay in the brown grass, their teeth sparkling in the weak December sun. Noticing her mistress's distress, as cats were naturally attuned to their humans' moods, Miss Prissypants opened one eye and studied the creatures with more intelligence than both of their brains combined contained. Avery moved her hand slowly and stroked Miss Prissypants' head.
Don't worry, honey. They'll have to eat me before they can get to you.
Maybe that wasn't the most reassuring thing she could have said, but most of her brain power was involved in trying to figure out if the hole she was looking through was big enough for the dogs to squeeze in. It was a toss-up.
Avery.
Jillian placed her hand on Avery's shoulder. She jumped and turned, smacking her head on the barn board before jerking herself out of the hole.
Ellie texted me, and I need to take over at the shop for a while. Oh, sure. Fine.
Avery had worked all morning and, although it was the busiest time of year for Christmas trees, it had been pretty slow, even for a Tuesday. Things always picked up in the afternoon.
Gator's here, and I'm going to find out what's going on.
She could only think of one reason why he and his woman-hating dogs would be here.
Ellie said they'd hold off on tearing the barn down until after Christmas.
Obviously, he couldn't wait. Jillian grinned and held a hand out, palm down in a calm down gesture.
I know. Maybe he's here to replace a few of the missing boards.
Avery didn't really think so, but she didn't disagree. She nodded skeptically, and with a raised brow, Jillian left. How could she confront that confounded man without getting eaten? Her stomach twisted when she glanced back out the opening. The dog still stared at her. A silvery rope of drool hung out of the brown one's mouth. Avery swallowed the tightness in her throat. She would brave the dogs for Mrs. Franks, if that's what it took to keep Gator from tearing her barn down. Plus, she wasn't the slightest bit afraid of facing him after holding his hand. He's the one that should be ashamed, since he knew his marital status. She had forgotten he was married. It was a mistake anyone could make. He could bet the farm, or the barn, that she wouldn't make it again. After peeking back out of the opening, she looked around the interior. Through the cracks in the barn wall, she could see where Gator's ladder leaned up against the side. Blessing Jillian for teaching her climbing techniques, this was the second time in the last few days that she had utilized them, she patted Miss Prissypants' head.
I'm sorry, little girl, but I have to set you down. I know I can climb up there, but I can't do it with you in your carrier. Plus, if I fall, I don't want you to get hurt. It's not your fault I'm terrified of dogs and have to avoid them at all costs.
Miss Prissypants seemed to understand. She always did. Avery gently set her on a small pile of old, musty straw bales.
Stay here until I get back.
After looking around, swishing her tail and sniffing the straw, Miss Prissypants settled her bottom end regally on the stiff bales.
It's not going to take me long. I'm simply going to inform him that Ellie, who owns this barn, said that it stands until after my party.
It wasn't Avery's barn, and she wasn't going to allow herself to be sad about its ultimate destruction. She would ignore the ache in her chest, and she would most certainly not think about how much rich history resided in these old beams and timbers. Finding handholds in the old wood was easy. Remembering the technique that Jillian had taught her, she twisted her knees out and flattened herself against the wall. Jillian could go faster, but Avery had never been athletic, so the very fact that she could even get herself up a wall seemed like a great accomplishment. However, she didn't take the time to congratulate herself on her achievement. There was an obtuse, obstinate man who needed to be reminded who, exactly, owned this barn. Angling her climb so that her head popped up in the open space caused by a missing board, Avery pulled herself up one last foot and, clinging to the wall with both hands and feet, stuck her head out the hole directly beside the ladder and Gator's large left foot.
"What are you doing?"
She wasn't going to beat around the bush. For one terrifying second, she was afraid that he was going to fall off the ladder. He jumped and swung his head around. "Holy crap, lady!"
"My name is Avery,"
she snapped, instantly remorseful. Her eyes dropped.
"I'm sorry. It wasn't my intention to scare you. However, I must inform you that you need to stop tearing this barn down immediately. I have express permission from Ellie Finkenbinder to use it for my Christmas party. That's not for 3 weeks. Obviously, it needs to be standing, intact at that time. Anything that you—"
"Stop. Be quiet for a second." Avery clamped her mouth shut. "First of all, I'm not tearing the barn down. I wanted to see the condition of the roof and do some measuring. Secondly, I spoke with Finkenbinder, who, apparently, owns the other half of this barn, and he said I could begin demolition today. I'm bonded and insured, and I have a signed contract with Fink." Gator lifted a brow. "You have a contract?"
"Of course not. Not for a party."
"You're insured." Avery looked down, way down. Her stomach wobbled and her vision wavered.
"Not yet."
"Then I'm not sure what the issue is."
"This is obviously a misunderstanding between Fink and Ellie. And as much as I don't like to get between married persons—"
Guilt hit her hard between the shoulder blades as she remembered Gator holding her hand, and worse, that she had liked it.
"But in this case, it's obvious that we need to say something to them."
She took a breath to go on, but Gator interrupted. "I don't see the need. I've got a contract. I've got a buyer, and I don't have time to mess around."
"You can't wait until after the party. It's only 3 weeks."
Something that felt close to panic balled in Avery's chest. It wasn't that big of a deal if she couldn't have the party for Mrs. Franks. She told herself that, but somehow it felt huge. "Look, I wish I could." He opened his mouth to say more, but then closed it like he changed his mind. He pulled his tape measure off his belt and began to pull the tape out, sliding it up the slope of the roof. His jaw set, his posture dismissive. Avery considered telling him about how the party would cheer his mother and possibly help fight the cancer, but she dismissed the idea. If he had such little regard for his wife and such little respect for his mother that he would stand in her kitchen holding the hand of a woman he wasn't married to, then trying to appeal to his compassionate nature was futile. Avery began to descend. She needed to get this stopped before it was too late. Ellie had agreed to allow her to have the party and to fix a few holes in the floor, but she wasn't going to be interested in paying to have the sides put back on the barn. When she reached the bottom, she checked Miss Prissypants, who was sleeping soundly. Typically, Avery took her almost everywhere, but she was in a bit of a hurry and knew the cat would be fine. She wanted to get this settled. The party was not going to cure Mrs. Franks of her cancer, but in her heart, Avery knew that recreating the evening when she got engaged and enabling her to relive those memories would encourage her and lift her spirits through the difficult cancer treatments. Avery hurried out of the barn toward the Christmas tree shop, feeling like a 5-year-old going to tattle on her little brother. But since the barn wasn't hers, there really wasn't another way to solve the problem. Hopefully, Ellie wasn't busy with a customer and they could get this fixed fast. She wasn't trying to keep Gator from tearing the barn down eventually, as much as she wished she could stop it. She just needed it to stay up for another few weeks until after her party. Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out the playlist with all our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.